Alright, this is Exodus chapter 21, part 3. And the first thing I wanted to do is go back a few scriptures. And the first one was, let's see. The one I wanted to go to was Exodus 21:15, where it says, "And he who strikes his father or his mother shall surely be put to death." Okay. This was about elder abuse. Okay. It had nothing to do with a father committing a crime, whether it be sexual assault or just plain old abuse on his children. Okay. So that scripture has nothing to do with the other. Okay. This was strictly about elder abuse. You don't just go up to a parent just because you don't like them and beat the tar out of them. Okay. So elder abuse is a little different than when you have a parent that is sexually assaulting you or just flat out physically assaulting you. That's different. Okay, and there are scriptures that cover that. This has nothing to do with that. This was strictly about elder abuse and nothing else. The other one was about if you injure a guy in a fight. That was about lawsuits, workman's comp, that kind of thing. All that stuff has run amok. It has gotten out of hand. And there you go. All right. So before you go thinking that one is like the other, that's no. Okay. Now, we were talking about if two guys were fighting and a pregnant woman comes out to try to break up the fight. Okay, what that meant was if the guy assaulting the pregnant woman's husband injured the pregnant woman to the point where she had a miscarriage, then the guy starting the fight, which would not be the pregnant lady's husband but the other guy, would be put to death. Okay, so person A, he picks a fight with person B. Person B's wife comes out, tries to break up the fight. Well, then person A assaults the pregnant wife. She has a miscarriage, so person A is put to death for that very reason. Okay. So that's what that's all about. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, so on and so forth. Okay. Now, here goes Exodus 21:26, which says, "If a man strikes the eye of his male or female servant and destroys it, he shall let him go free for the sake of his eye." And it goes on with if he knocks out a tooth, same situation. So if you give your slave a significant injury of any kind, a loss of an eye, a loss of a tooth, loss of a finger, any kind of injury whatsoever, that slave was automatically free. Even though he's supposed to be indebted to you for 6 years, he's automatically free because you injured him that bad. So it was not in your best interest to abuse a slave. And that's why the southern plantation owners in the time of the Civil War suffered such economic losses, because they had injured their slaves and had not set them all free. An additional crime to what they had already done. It was already bad enough that they kidnapped them, forced them into labor, and then some they actually killed. So that was bad enough, but then they turned right around and were beating their slaves enough where they were losing eyes, teeth, fingers, you name it, and they never let their slaves free. So God put them out under massive judgment for that. So now, you have these southern plantation owners, they have committed 4 crimes against God. 4 of them. That's why they were put out of business by God himself. That's why the Civil War happened. Get it straight, people. Anyway. Okay, if an ox. Now back then they used oxen for farming. Okay, if you want to go and do all the research, you can find out how oxen were used for farming at that time. Okay, If an ox gores a man or a woman to death, then the oxen shall surely be stoned. Ox misbehaves, they're done. And its flesh shall not be eaten. Okay? So if your ox just suddenly goes out of control and gores somebody to the point it kills them, the ox is put to death. You can't cook them, nothing. Because back in that time, when an ox got to a certain stage, they killed the ox and they cooked it. Still got value out of it. You couldn't do that if the ox got out of control. You just had to kill it and just destroy it. Okay? But the owner of the ox, look, if your ox goes out of control and you had no idea it was going to do that, you can't be responsible for a person's death. The ox was responsible for the death, not you. You just had no idea your ox would suddenly go out of control. That way, you weren't persecuted for an unintentional death. Okay. Now, if you knew that your ox was trouble in the first place, and then that ox goes out and kills somebody, and you knew it was trouble and you didn't deal with it right off the bat, that's negligence. And then the ox was killed and so were you. It's like, you can't control your pets, we're going to control you, we're going to get rid of you. And I think that should be done even today. If you have an out-of-control pet, a cat, a dog, or somebody that's really causing serious... It's just like people that own Dobermans. They know dang good well they can't control the Doberman. There you go. So... Okay, now, if an ox knocks off a male or female servant, okay, so let's say you own an ox and your ox gets out of control, flies out of your field, runs into a neighbor's field, and knocks off a male or female servant, then even though you won't be put to death because you didn't know that ox was going to do that, you still have to give the owner of that slave 30 shekels of silver because your ox killed that slave. Of course, the ox is also killed and then burn up. Okay? Now, if you dig a pit on your yard and you don't cover that pit afterwards, okay, you just leave it out in the open. You're supposed to, when you make a pit, you're supposed to cover it. But if you don't, and some neighbor's pet gets flying over and lands in your pit, okay, the owner of the pit shall make it good. He shall give money to their owner, but the dead animal shall be his. So, if your neighbor's ox or donkey leaves their land, goes to your land, and falls in your pit, because you didn't cover it up, then you get to keep the dead animal, but you have to compensate the owner of the neighbor. You have to compensate your neighbor for his ox or his donkey. If your ox, okay, kills your neighbor's ox, then what's going to happen is that your ox is going to be sold off, and the profits are going to be divided between you and your neighbor. And the dead ox is going to be divided for food. Okay? And I think you're kind of getting the idea of how this all comes down. It's a matter of keeping your pets under control. There's times when you don't know your pet's going to go out of control, and that's fine. But if you know your pet's going to go out of control, you better take care of it, because if you don't, you're going to owe your neighbor. And most importantly, if that pet goes out of control and kills either your neighbor's pet or your neighbor's children or your neighbor itself, so on and so forth, you're really responsible. And that's what was being talked about in Exodus 21. Alright, I'm going to stop that from here. The big things about the last statements I was talking about was controlling your animals and what to do about a neighbor that doesn't control theirs. And that's what all this was all about. Alright, I will tell you more in a future video, so stay tuned.